no one no one in these mental health spaces are talking about funeral directors, and that to me is alarming.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Glam Reaper podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Muldowney, aka the Glam Reaper. On today's episode, we are talking all things mental health and then some. I'd like to introduce one of my favorite people in the space, Dwight. Dwight and me we met through the Funeral Professional Peer Support Group, which is I'm going to give them a shout out. That's a great group. If you're in the funeral space at all, really, check out they have, I think it's weekly, monthly meetings. They have a lot of resources, generally just helping funeral professionals with mental health in this space. And we are going to talk about that and more things. Dwight, welcome to the episode. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and I love the Glam Reaper, and this is probably one of my most listened to podcasts. But it's a great podcast because it really does it doesn't always specifically talk to people that work in death care
Yes.
directly. You've got like a huge amount of people that are coming in, filling in the spaces around death care
Yeah.
that make it an interesting podcast. Yes.
Yes, we definitely our audience is quite varied. We've funeral professionals that listen in, and then we have what I would consider, especially 16 years ago, the me's of the world, the Joe Public, the person who's interested. Maybe they're interested in being a funeral director or death doula or into celebrant work or in some way just have been marked by the business or by death or loss. But we've some fascinating stories. We've had people from both in the industry talk on the show, and then people who've just gone through their own experiences of loss, and people who work in the space and have experienced their own losses. Because at the end of the day, funeral professionals are human beings, and we also have families, and we also suffer grief and loss and stuff like that. So, yeah, we're wide and varied. We do not discriminate here for sure. But it's great to have you on the show. And tell the listeners, Dwight, if you don't mind, just a little bit about your professional day to day realm. You're based in Canada.
Yes. I am based in Canada. I am in Ottawa, Ontario. Well, just outside of Ottawa. Nobody knows where Morrisburg is. It's very cold today, a lot of snow. Although yesterday was 15 degrees and it was beautiful.
Lovely.
Today we woke up to power outages and a lot of snow. I live in a section of Ontario that gets a lot of bad weather.
Mm.
But it's very warm in here, though.
Warm in your heart. Love that.
Um, I work full time for a practice for Ottawa Psychotherapy Services, and I'm the director of Veteran Services for the practice. So I look after the work of about 19 clinical associates who are all seeing veterans and what we know as the rehabilitation program through Veterans Affairs Canada. So that's my day-to-day stuff. My hobby though is mental health with funeral directors or funeral service professionals, I should say.
Yeah.
Uh, so just to build on that, it's not like I and just this is sort of a fetish or a kink for me. Um, Prior to becoming a marriage and family therapist, I was a funeral director for 15 years.
Yeah.
And so I have both an embalmer and a funeral director's license in Nova Scotia. And then I wrote my Ontario board exams and I got a class one license. And then I was roughly in this space for 15 years. And then I started transitioning out into my social work training and degree. Large part because I was finding myself very drawn to the grief work and the counseling aspects of being a funeral director. That's sort of what got me uh, on the road towards that. But now, after being in this space for 15 years, I'm now looking back at my first 15 years and going, you know what? That explains a lot of stuff.
Yeah. You're now almost mine. too. Well, and it's interesting how you almost did the opposite of me, slightly, where I went from wedding planning to funeral planning. So I always say I went, I turned to the dark side. You turned from the dark side to the light, as in you went into wedding and marriage. I don't know that it's the light side, honestly, but maybe it's the even darker side. I don't know. Uh,
Various shades of gray.
Yes, well, there's a movie after that, so we won't go into what that maybe
Yeah.
that's brought up in some of your counseling sessions. I don't know. Um, Various different shades of gray. We color outside the box here. Um, and so yeah, so you're kind of almost coming full circle. You're taking your first 15 years, combining it with the last 15 years, which marriage and the implosion and divorce and of marriage and all that sort of stuff is loss and is grief, and we talk about that widely on this podcast too, and for me myself in voicing that, there's very huge varieties of loss and grief. It's not just the actual physical death of somebody. But tell me, what was there a turning point where which drew you back into the funeral space, and therefore, meeting with Michael and funeral professional peer support and
Yeah, yeah. I was listening to all the funeral directors talk about their mental health, and I started going, "Oh my goodness, that's me." Um, and it really hit home in a couple ways. The first one was like, okay, the funeral home did actually do a number on my head. And then the second way was like, but no one was there to support me.
yeah.
So it actually brought up a memory when I was doing my apprenticeship in Nova Scotia, where I actually okay, so you have to get this. I was doing my apprenticeship in Nova Scotia, being paid every 2 weeks, $274. And there was a period in my apprenticeship where I had to get support and someone I think it was probably the church I was attending at the time, they said, "Why don't you see a therapist?" And I didn't even know at that point what therapists were all about, but
Yeah.
I went and she wanted of course, it was private, so I had to pay out of pocket, but I remember giving $60 to her, and that was, like, m most of my pay for that pay period, right? And she I told her what was going on. I just got right into the bones of it and told her what was going on, and that was it. There was no, like she didn't know what to say, she didn't say anything helpful, she didn't even know my career, she didn't even know, um, what funeral directors did. Like, she knew what funeral directors do in the very broad
Yeah.
surface sense, but
Yeah.
she could she couldn't imagine the things that I was going through at the time, and there was a few things that I had gone through that looking back, I was like, "Yeah, you needed to go to therapy to deal with that." But because of the time and the context, I mean, at that point, mental health wasn't even a word, or a phrase in the funeral home, so when I went to see this therapist, she was not prepared
To
to
deal with this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so that got me thinking when I was listening to the podcast, I was like, "Has that changed? Have therapists actually, gotten educated in the ways of the funeral home?" And after spending like 2 years with FPPS, I can confidently say, Jennifer, they have not. There's absolutely no training programs. We're not talking about when I went to social work school, which was undergrad and graduate, and now I'm doing my doctorate in social work at Barry University in Florida. Although I'm not there on campus, I'd love to be.
Yay, you're getting
Uh,
close in person.
no one no one in these mental health spaces are talking about funeral directors,
Wow.
and that to me is alarming.
And do they in these courses, do they cover a myriad of occupations?
Yeah, they do. I mean, if you're talking to police, first responders, like police, firefighters,
Yeah.
military, they have research out the wazoo, like,
Yeah.
and interventions focused on like, there's so much money funneled into the first responder community, it's ridiculous. But then when it comes to funeral directors, we get, and this is another beef I have, and you're gonna hear about some of my beefs, but I
Lot
have
of beef on this show. We love it. Give it to us.
I hate the word. The word fits, but I actually hate the phrase last responder because it groups into the first responder community, and we are nothing like the first responder community. I'm not even sure, but I guess we have to be somewhere on the chronology of things. So I guess
Yeah.
last respond. But I think what happens is when clinicians like myself hear that phrase, they do think first response. And so they go, well, I work with firefighters or I work with, you know, Joe Blow, who's the police officer. I know what the responder community is about. Um, but they're not the same. They're not the same. A couple weeks ago, I was doing a FPPS presentation to the students in the Nova Scotia class, which is where I went to school. And one of them said, "Yeah, I went to see a therapist," and when I said, "Do you have any experience with funeral directors?" She said, "Oh, I work with police officers." And the student said to me, I don't know that." I think she was hoping that would build a connection, but I just felt like she was telling me without telling me, "I don't know your world," right? And
Yeah.
so in our world, in mental health, it's a very tricky thing to say to people, I have training or have background in kind of the meat and bones of what you do for a living, because there are a lot of training programs that focus on that, but there are none with last responders. So when someone says, you know, "I know what your business is about," I think, A, where did you get your training? Or B, maybe that person is a funeral director, or maybe they grew up in a funeral home with parents who are funeral directors. So that would be very apropos to say that you understand, but there's nothing. We're not talking about this, and as far as the research goes, I mean, the research is even more scant. I think there's maybe under 50 actual peer-reviewed articles that talk about the various aspects of how this work impacts the funeral director, but
Yeah.
they're just short-term, like, snapshots in time that really, at the end of the day, all we could say is they're just exploratory. They're not really, conclusive about
Yeah.
a lot of.
Mhm.
So, then it brings up another thing, another beef with me is that the funeral homes right now who are scrounging for mental health resources are borrowing very heavily from interventions or modalities that have been created for other populations. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work or that there couldn't be some similarities there too, but I mean, ethically speaking, in my line of work as a mental health professional, we can't just do best guesses around whether or not it's going to work. We have to know from what the research tells us whether or not these interventions we do not only work for police and firefighters, but also work with funeral directors, which there are not. I just finished my huge quantitative research class at Barry, which was a full review of all the clinical literature around funeral directors and mental health, and there's absolutely zero. So it's a very under-researched area and a very interesting thing to look at least from my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's absolutely it is. I think it was our first season or maybe season 2 or whatever, we had Dr. Sarah Murphy on, talking about suicidology and stuff like that. And, I know she regularly speaks at the national conferences and stuff. And, she's talking about dealing with families with suicides as well as she'll touch on, mental health in the community and stuff like that. And, so there are people who are like yourself and like her and like Michael who are trying to shine a light in the dark corner of the darkest corner of careers, I guess, is right. Like, to me, as somebody who And I don't even know that I'm in the dark corner, honestly. I've spoken about mental health myself several times back in Ireland as well. And, I'm not a therapist. I can only speak to my own experiences. I'm not a funeral director, but I work with families who are grieving, and I've, been around bodies. I've worked in funeral homes and stuff like that. So I'm always very clear. I can only speak to my own experiences, and I have developed, a PDF to help people, because that's the thing. We all grieve differently, we heal differently, we seek therapy differently. We're not all the same. And so it's finding what works for you in order for you to live your life as healthily as you can, right? Um, but so while I say that I'm on the periphery, like I don't work in a funeral home, and I don't, whether it's corporate or independently owned, or I don't work with the human, the physical body and stuff like that. So there are certain things that I can't speak to. And so that's why I would say I'm on the periphery. But you know, that corner, and I think it's a dark corner of careers of, it's not necessarily even brought up in career fairs. Like, do you see funeral directors and mortuary schools showing up at career fairs the odd time? But really, I know Carrie Northey, she has regularly does a career fair, and she posts about it on socials. But she's an advocate for the funeral profession, and she speaks on social media about it. And so to her, that makes absolute sense. Why wouldn't they be at a career fair? But there's so many other funeral homes out there, and I know they don't show up at their local school's career fair or anything like that. I know that they don't. And that's another way, A, for community involvement, B, drawing back the curtains on this very dark aspect of life. Um, but we're in a dark corner of the world where, the light is not there. We're not talked about. I mean, during COVID, we gave ourselves the name, I think, the last responders, because we, to your point, but also we needed to be known as something, I think was the thing. It was kind of like, hey, hi guys, we're here. Don't forget us. Right.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that, like, is it the best term? Probably not. But because, as you're so right, it does bundle us together. But I think there was a little part of us that was like, please bundle us with you, people who are getting free Starbucks to keep your energy levels going, and all the other things that were thrown at people, because, they were just so blatantly ignored during COVID. And it's like the cleanup crew, that comes in after you've had a party in your home or in a nightclub. The cleanup crew are like, they're the sordid, dirty, dark. You don't
Research.
you don't know who they are. Yeah, you don't want to know.
The research calls this the dirty work.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's heavily stigmatized, right? It's a
100%. Even I feel like if you were a child and you wanted to you put your hand up in class to say you wanted to become a funeral director or work in mortuary science in general, I feel like you would be polarized. I feel like you would be, "Oh, you weirdo. Like, why do you wanna work with dead people? Like, what's that about?" I can definitely testify to that. When I first started my business, Farewell Funeral Planners, back in Ireland, 100 years ago, it feels like, it was, "What? Are you insane? Like, why do you want to work with dead people?" Well, first of all, I don't work with the dead people. I work with the living who are mourning the dead. But it's massively stigmatized. And so we've got this dark, dirty, dusty corner, and trying to get the world to shine a light in that corner is just so difficult. But yet, this corner is the most needed corner of life, because guess what? We're all dying. And I know the famous quote of there'll always be death and taxes, or whatever it is. There won't always be taxes. Taxes can actually disappear if a decision is made, right? Like, and I know there's even talk right now of people not paying their taxes as we come into tax season, but taxes technically you don't have to do. You really, if you choose to not, um, or whatever, there is ways to evade tax. Death, no.
no, no.
So why are we so alienated?
We we're still, even though we've got things like, grief cafes, or sorry, death cafes. I think the general trend has been a more openness towards death and what that means, but Jennifer, I think we're still death
Oh,
denying cul
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm writing my 4th book. I've been writing it for the last 4 years, 6 years, actually, I think it is. Good lord. Anyway, I laugh because I wrote my 1st book in 2 months. I don't know why this one is so painstaking. But, like, my 4th book is really it's more of a coaching style book, and it's basically about if we would just face the fact that we are dying, that we live better and we love more, and, you know,
Yeah.
just that fact of people who, there's been research done where, people go to a funeral, they are more aware of their mortality in the 24 hours and the week around that funeral because they've just had death smack them in the face. Even if it was just a neighbor or somebody that they weren't necessarily connected with, suddenly their mortality is right there, right in front of their nose. And then it goes away again. Um,
Sure.
it's very fascinating. I mean, it really, really is, the whole area. And it's so unfortunate then for those that work in the space. Because now you've got this corner that nobody wants to go into, and then you've got these people working hard in the corner, burnt out, not getting paid enough, not getting any appreciation or gratitude, and no one there to help them, no resources. Which is where I do think funeral professional peer support is an incredible um resource for funeral homes, which is why I give my time freely to Michael and crew, and I know you do too. And I wish more people would. And I know it's very difficult to give your time for free at all. Time is nearly more valuable than money per se, but it's so important to support each other in these ways that we can.
FPPS, or funeral professionals peer support, um, they offer, uh, it's just an important, it's not the whole thing around mental health, but they
No.
offer such an important piece, which
Yeah.
is the peer support and the thing that people get when they get in a room and they start talking about things that they have in common, and something literally happens to people's what we call their attachment system. It shifts into a receive and give type of
Yeah.
um emotional arrangement, I guess, and that stuff are the building blocks to healing, right? And here's the thing, Michael's program is free. It's
Yep.
like there's no money involved in it. There's no commitment even asked for it.
Yeah.
Um, Yet it's so, actually, I thought it would be all over the world, but well, it kind of is all over the world, but I thought it would be better known
Yes.
in a sense, and it still surprises me that, actually, there was a research study that came out in 2025 in Ontario. It's a qualitative study about funeral directors. And in that research, they have quoted someone as saying, I know there's a group or something here somewhere in Canada or whatever. I don't know what it is though. And I'm like, that's FPPS.
Yes.
Call the journal and get a retraction or something.
Well, do you know, that is from a marketing point of view, that's where I would say that's a branding issue, that's a branding problem. So, that if your name is too long, which it is a very long name. If
Yeah.
your name is too long, or it's not notable, or it's like even myself, right? Like people will always remember the Glam Reaper. They don't even remember my name.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, it's
Yeah.
the Glam Reaper. Hey, Glam." I'm like, "Hey, it's Jennifer, but sure." You know?
What if we just call ourselves the lowering device?
The lowering device. I mean, it's a funeral joke. That's terrible. The way we have to amuse ourselves, but it's true. I mean, that is unfortunately. Here's the thing, though, Dwight. And you're touching the nail on the head a little bit, and this is my business degree coming out in me, but that is, and you and I have talked about this because we are working on a conference, webinar, festival type affair around this coming in fall 2026. But it has to be all of the things. Like when I very, very first started in my business, I started in Ireland. My business was called Farewell Funeral Planners. Very simple, can be shortened to farewell, not a big deal. I did not have the budget to educate the public as to what the heck I was. People were like, "If you're not a funeral director, what are you? If you're not a priest, what are you? We don't understand. Why do we need you?" And the thing is, I still to this day I get those questions, but I can explain it better. I have a lot more brand visibility. I have a lot more content out there. People now know more what I do, but I didn't have the budget. I had zero budget. I was a startup business. I was in my 20s. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
and so if I could go back, yes, I would change the way I approached it completely. And the reason, so the business it didn't fold completely, but I kind of came back to base, and that's how my first book actually got written, was because I was like, I have this information. How do I get it to the public when they're not willing to pay for this other person to help with a funeral? Because in Ireland, you go to the church and you go to your local funeral home. So now I was offering to be this intermediary, right? And so they were just like, I don't understand. What's the point? So I didn't have the budget. I didn't have the marketing ability. I didn't have the say. I didn't have the connections, all of that sort of stuff, that is a bit of the problem. So funeral professional peer support has a marketing business operations problem because it doesn't have the budget behind it. It's free, which it should be free, and it's amazing that it's free, but there's also that perception of if it's free, it's crap. People think if it's free, it's crap. If it's $100 million, then oh my God, it must be worth, woo, holy moly, that must be good stuff, right? So there's that
Yeah.
perception, number one. Then there's also we don't have the funeral professional peer support doesn't have the budget to advertise, to create videos, to pay people to do content. Because, guys, guess what? I'm doing this podcast. You're sitting down with me for free. I'm here for free, right? This is an hour of our time to do this podcast. There's no sponsors on this podcast. This is a hobby to me, and people love the podcast, and I love that they love it. But like, it's my love out, doing content. But you need to pay people to do content. You need to pay people to do your website, to do videos, to manage calls, to set up calls, to set up guests, all of this sort of stuff. And funeral
Right.
professional peer support does not have that purse. It has no money coming in. I mean, it has marginal, I'm not saying it has no support, but it needs more weight behind it.
Yes.
And maybe some
Do
better
you do you ever wonder though too if that is not just the branding piece, but I always go back to the mental health piece, but do you ever wonder though, like, if that is also just a sign of the reluctance of maybe the funeral service or the bereavement sector, I call it, last
Yes.
people under
So I at 100%. I guess there's two issues I think funeral professional peer support has, or anybody coming into this space. And we did have Caleb Wild on the podcast, I think 2 seasons ago as well.
is great,
You
is great.
yes, huge advocate in the mental health space and stuff like that. Great conversation with him too. I think we actually even had to break it up into 2 episodes, 3 episodes of the
Oh,
movie.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
3, it was 3
Yeah. Was
episodes.
it three? Oh my god.
3, yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a business point of view. Like, if you even and I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, so many funeral homeowners are not businessmen. And I'm using the word men because unfortunately still 80% I think are men. But they're not businessmen. They were brought up generationally in the business, and they were just handed it down. I have a degree in business, and I still wouldn't call myself a great businesswoman. Like, I learn every day, never mind every month and every year. I get schooled by people younger than me. I learn from people older than me. It's a constant learning process. But you have to be good at business, and business to get your business out there. It is branding, it is marketing, it is social media nowadays, it is being online. I have seen so many businesses that had, I'm not going to say the cure to cancer. I didn't work with these, but like, I could see that there is businesses out there that have come up with the cure to cancer, but they haven't been able to get the funding, the awareness. There's been some sort of, maybe on the board or in the COO, and the CEO couldn't get on, and so it never made it to market, yada, yada, yada. There are so many facets behind every idea that when you walk into your supermarket and you see eggs or you see your liter of milk, that is not just happens to be on the shelf. There are so many business decisions made behind that, right? And unfortunately, I've both worked in and witnessed businesses that should have changed the world and they've crumbled due to business failures, right? So that is problem number one. But 100% problem number two is, in some weird way, funeral directors are actually quite Irish. And I say that just because we, as Irish people, we don't talk about our emotions. It's our famous saying is be grand, be grand. Your arm could be hanging off, Dwight, and an Irish person would still be like, sure, be grand. Don't I have another one? Like, we are renowned for move on, pick up your britches, and just keep on trucking. And I feel like that is the case in the funeral space. But again, it kind of ties into the branding a little bit as well. Because if it's not, if as a funeral professional, I see something advertised, if I don't feel safe, secure, that I can trust the source, and that I will get something from it, which all comes from the way we brand and market that event, I'm not going to join. Because here's the thing, and you and I talked about this just before this call, is our time is so freaking precious. Like I am like a bat out of hell. I am running around like a blue arse fly 24/7. I feel like I just sleep and work, which I love. I'm not complaining about it. I absolutely love, well, I do complain because that's the Irish way, but like I do love it. You know, I wouldn't give it up tomorrow. Um, but you have to like I made time for this to chat with you because I see value in this. I want this conversation to happen. And so we have to, no matter what we advertise or how we advertise and market these mental health things, it has to, like McDonald's. I mean, like, and I used to like absorb so many of these like branding and business books back in the day. But like McDonald's, if you're hungry and you're driving down a highway and you've had a hell of a day, when you see those golden arches, you know exactly what you will get.
Right.
It might not be your five-course dinner, steak dinner that you want, you know, from Keen's in New York or wherever your favorite steakhouse is, but you know what you're gonna get. You know it's reliable, you can trust it. You know the amount of public or private interaction you'll have. Like you can order a 10-course meal and eat it all in your car if you want, you know, if you're feeling that way, right? You know that there's that. And that's but that
And I have done
well, there you go. But when you think about that, Dwight, like that's how it feels like with your mental health, because especially if you're such a private person, you don't want to come onto a public forum and be airing, well, this is my problem. It's free, okay. And yes, and I've noticed from helping doing some of these webinars is we'll get 3 or 4 people and they'll come on and they'll just about participate, but they won't say a whole lot. And it could be that they're just getting enough from the conversation, but I guarantee you each of those needs an actual therapist. It needs that one-to-one, and, you know,
let
so it's
let me
combo.
give
Mhm.
let me give you just a little example of something that I learned in my social work, well, in my marriage and family therapy training. I'd often see families or couples. Couples is the majority of the work that I do when it comes to relationships. Um, we had a little saying that the problem that gets created in the system itself is unable to fix it. So what that means is, like, when couples or families come to me and they say, "I've got this problem," they're actually, kinda colluding with each other in their own unique way to keep the problem. And the only way to change that is to interject, like, myself or and often actually, well, in the field of marriage and family therapy, usually couples deal with that by pulling children into their 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 problems. But I look at funeral service and I go, like, in the industry and the service itself, the culture of silence is so pervasive that I don't even think we really fully comprehend just how much it is seeped into the way we interact, the way our
Yeah.
our identities as funeral professionals are formed, all that stuff breathes it and I think unfortunately, when you get a bunch of funeral directors trying to solve the issue of mental health, it doesn't go that far because we have been not to talk about it, right? And
Yeah.
so you're always fighting against that. People like you, Jennifer, though, who like you're not in that, but you are kind of in that, but you're an outsider, which is actually a good thing. We need those people who are not exactly in the system, but part of it, but they
Yeah.
can come in and talk about it and put words to it because I sometimes think we even struggle with our own particular language around mental
Yep.
health and what that means. And I honestly think half of the issues or problems that funeral directors face, they do need other professionals to help them solve it, like including their attrition. No, sorry, not attrition, retention
Yeah.
issue. I'm I don't think that funeral homes are or associations are going to be able to solve that problem unless they invite other people like social workers or sociologists or psychologists to come in and say, "Hey, look at us, what we're doing, and give us some feedback." But then,
Yeah.
in my experience, white men with feedback is usually not very good.
Yeah. Down with that sort
Not
of
to
thing.
stereotype.
Yeah. There's no room for feedback and my ego to fit into this room.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a whole issue itself too, right?
Yeah. It's a listen, it is a tricky, tricky area. And Dwight, I, for one, am grateful that you are in it, in it with me at least, or as much as I
Mm,
can give and help with you with everything. But I'm glad that, there are people like you and others who are shining a light in this dark corner and doing what we can to help. We are gonna wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for joining us, Dwight. I feel like we could chat about this for another hour. Maybe we'll do another mini podcast when we're at our convention at our festival in the fall in 2026. So watch this space if you are listening and you're a funeral professional and you're interested in any way, shape, or form. We hope to bring proper educated resources, research and development in this area to you. And yeah, your feedback is always welcome. And I know, Dwight, you've been conducting your own sort of market research and stuff. So we'll leave some links
yeah.
as well below for people to look you up on LinkedIn, and you can share with us some of those important links for people to give feedback. That'd be great, I think.
Can I just briefly share a few of the topics that we're
Yep.
gonna be looking at in the week of so we're not it's just not mental health, we're looking at how being a funeral director impacts your wider life. So we've got topics on neurodiversity for the funeral director. We've got, of course, grief. I'm gonna talk about sex and relationships with
Those
in the
those
funeral.
50 shades, those 50 shades, Dwight.
But often, actually, people don't realize that there's a connection between sexual functioning and working in and around existential, um, services, like
I love
death and dying
Yeah,
and all that stuff. I'm gonna talk about that, and I think we have a funeral director talking about finding joy in your work, and we hope I think there's someone lined up to talk about, when you work in the funeral home, when you have children, how that ferrets out. So it's not just all about mental health. It's about living your life as a funeral director and what's going on in the world around you.
very cool, very cool. Well, guys, watch this space on that and stay tuned. Dwight is he's the man with the info. And thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.